West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Senator, I have to say, I share that feeling of, it's just hard to believe that this was actually discussed on the Senate floor and then blocked on the Senate floor by Republicans who no longer believe in the right to travel.
Exactly, Lawrence. And my friend Catherine Cortez Masto is leading this bill. And the reason we believe it's so important is that, one, we need to codify Roe v. Wade into law. And I think you know, until we get to the election and add those Democratic senators, that's not going to happen. But what we can do now is at least guaranteeing women the rights to travel to states that may allow for reproductive services. Look at what just happened. We had a 10-year-old get raped in Ohio and then had to go to Indiana to get an abortion. That is what we're seeing, this patchwork of laws across the country. And so we really have actual proof that they're doing this. In Missouri, they introduced a bill that said you could sue private citizens who would help people to travel to another state to get reproductive services. In Texas, they're preparing a law to go after companies criminally that would provide resources to women or girls that want to go to other states to get reproductive services. That's what we're dealing with right now. And it has been only 20 days since the Dobbs decision. And so far, over 20 states have been banning abortion. That's what we're dealing with, and we're going to have over half the states when this is done. And that's why I just keep focusing on doing everything we can do now, pushing the envelope, and then pushing towards the election to change this.
Senator, it doesn't feel like that long ago, or maybe it does now because time is moving so differently, that you and I, or law students around the country in law school classrooms, could sit around and come up with theoretical cases that you could be absolutely sure would be 9-0 votes in the Supreme Court. 9-0 on, of course, the constitutional right to travel, and no state has the authority to ask any questions about why you're traveling to or from another state. That would be a 9-0 decision by the Supreme Court, but I don't know anymore. I just don't know.
And I think what we have seen was a plan for a very long time to put these justices on the court. And you know, from you and I was on many times during these confirmation hearings talking about how extreme these nominees were. And now we're seeing it put into action. So when one branch of the government gets that out of whack, our framers set up our form of government so another branch can step in. And that's what this coming election is about. I also think that you're going to start seeing one by one these horrific stories like the one I just brought up. When that story first came out, all these people were saying, oh, that's not really true. Well, now we saw it in black and white. A horrible, horrible act occurred, a rape. It is in a complaint filed in Ohio that clearly say that this little girl not only was raped, but got pregnant. And to think that the law in these states now says that that little girl, that her family can't make that decision about whether or not she would carry a baby of a rapist, but instead the politicians have decided that she would have to, and her only recourse is to go to another state. And now we have some states that are even threatening to limit the right to go to other states. That's why we had that vote today. And sadly, while we may have had a debate on the floor, we were not able to actually debate the vote and go to a vote and really call our colleagues out on this to show where they stand.
Well, if you got to a vote, by the way, that is the technique, right? That's what Senator Langford's job was, to stand up there as a Republican from Oklahoma and block this coming to a vote, specifically so you couldn't have a recorded vote with Republican senators' names on it voting against the right to travel in America, and so that those Republican senators wouldn't have that liability in a re-election campaign.
Exactly. We just sought unanimous consent to move to that bill, to get a vote, and to actually have the vote on this, and we never got one. And our colleagues blocked this from going forward. And I think you're going to see this happen over and over again. And we're not going to give up, Lawrence. And I think it's also important to note, when you see the actions of the Attorney General, Republican Attorney General of Texas today, who is actually trying to stop the Biden administration's effort to say, well, at least this one federal law says that you've got to guarantee a woman's right to have an abortion if her very life depends on it and she might die as an emergency procedure. And now he's trying to stop that. So it just illustrates how this isn't, yes, it's about the U.S. Senate, but it's also about the House, and it's about governors' races, it's about attorney generals' races, it is about legislatures across the country that are passing these kinds of bills. And it is really important to see it as from the every level of government, if we're going to protect a woman's reproductive right and guarantee that, my daughter doesn't have less rights than me or her grandma.
And the Republicans who have been arguing for this for years in the Senate, almost all of them expecting this day to never come and kind of hoping it would never come so they wouldn't have to actually live with the results of what they've been advocating. They've all been pretending that those 10-year-old girls don't exist, and they've been pretending that for 50 years.
I was thinking about that today because of my former job as a prosecutor. We'd see these cases, these horrific child rape cases, and 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds. And so this is sadly not going to be the last case like this. Now, would there ever been that discussion about what happened and if the girl got pregnant? Not as much in many states because the doctors just took care of it. The family was there. But in this case, you're going to have these little kids having to travel to other states on top of the trauma they've already experienced. So I just think they're exactly right. People are trying to pretend this isn't happening. They say things so that you don't think it's real, but we're going to find out pretty quickly just how real this is. And one thing I disagree, I think many of our colleagues did know how they would vote. Not for all of them, but for many of them, it was very clear where these justices, where they were going to head, no matter what they said at these hearings. When you looked at their backgrounds, I think that there was always, and that's why I asked the justices about this hearing after hearing, how they construed the law. And by the way, not just when it comes to women's reproductive health, on the environment, on voting and the like. And this was the plan, and this is what we've got now. And we must do everything we can to change it.
It is Friday, the 15th of July of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Yeah, put that in your hopper. Okay. Enough of the puns. How are you today? I want Major Biden, the German Shepherd that had to get rehomed because apparently he was biting Secret Service agents. Well, he knew. He knew all along what was going on. Now we know too. So, now that we know, and the Secret Service knows that we know, what did they do? Oh yeah, they just deleted all text messages on the 5th and 6th of January. Why would they do that? Why would they do that at the beginning of a coup? Oh, because the coup had been ongoing long before January 6th. Yes, indeed. We know it's been a multi-decade effort by the right wing to change the face of America back to, I don't know, was it just freedom to make money and to have like warlord status? They talk about old Europe, but boy, they sure want to get back there, don't they? Everything that we fought for in the American Revolution has been torn asunder. This is what happens when you appease Nazis. We should have never allowed those slave states to dictate how we were going to govern these United States. And then we had to put up with them again in the Civil War, and now we're putting up with them again right now. Half the states, as was just mentioned in the clip, half the states are going to be anti-abortion. They're going to be Nazi slave states. But we got to keep them together because we have these collective United States. No, it's about time we set our foot down and federalize some property. Is that what it's going to take? Oh, that'll foment a civil war. I'm sorry, we're already in one. They even have their shock troop goose-stepping brown shirts. We try to hold them to account. They pack the courts with their Nazi judges. Oh, that's a misdemeanor. Go ahead. Get out of here. You got your law enforcement and your military stacked full of Nazis. And then their Nazi representatives in the House and the Senate block bills to root out Nazis and white supremacists and racists in the military. Why? They fear we won't be able to stock our military unless it's full of Nazis, white supremacists, racists. I got to tell you, they'll be able to stock our military with forward-thinking, rational, loyal patriots. We don't need these seditious traitors amongst us telling us what to do anymore. Word is out that the GOP is going to be dumping millions upon millions upon millions of dollars in small races all over Oregon because they see it as a flip. They see that they can get a majority in our state house. And even though the majority of the people are blue, the Nazis are going to take over. They've already been doing it with our school boards, Proud Boys and Oath Keepers coming in, terrorizing the community so people don't run. And then who's left? Jamal Pariah Paul threatened with death, and they let the guy out. Why? Because the Seattle cops went beyond the statute of limitations to turn over evidence so that they could hold the freak. But Brett is in Morton's, in the back of Morton's, doesn't even know there's a protest going on, and everybody's in an uproar about what a danger he was under by geriatric protesters drawing chalk figures on the sidewalk. You got Mickey Weinstein threatened. I mean, he wrote about it on Daily Kos. Check it out. And we're still saying, oh, well, you know, maybe we can all have a handshake and come to a gentleman's agreement. They are not gentlemen. There's no such thing as a gentleman in a Nazi. There's nothing gentle about it. Please. That's why they're Nazis. They're Doms. Bunch of cucks and incels, but they're Doms. You know, just like in the movies. I gotta tell you, the people that produced those movies had to deal with Nazis. Jesus. Do you think Mel Brooks was joking? My God, no. He wasn't. He was telling the truth. Jeez. All right. Well, we're learning our lesson, and the regret I have is that we're at that age now where it's kind of hard to scamper around to punch these Nazis when they actually need to be punched. What are we left with? Drawing chalk figures on the sidewalk and being called terrorists and carted away. Jeez. Then you got the captains of industry meeting up, colluding on how to amass even more money to install this guy again. You'd think that maybe he was going to get enough money from fundraising off Ivana's death, which is a question in and of itself, so convenient. Days before they are supposed to sit in front of a grand jury. My question is, when they found her at the bottom of the staircase, was she a potential witness for the January 6th committee or the RICO case that was going on? I wonder. I don't put it above any of them. This is the society we live in. People apparently have romanticized mobsters so much we're being run by mobsters for real. It was all fun and games when it was like fun and games. But when you have the whole of the GOP blocking bills to keep a woman from being able to travel for any reason, makes one wonder. Now, I did come across a story that was in Daily Kos too about an Australian woman who was going to go house sit, cat sit in Canada. And she'd been stopped at LAX customs, and they interrogated her and asked if she was pregnant and if she was had an abortion, and then they deported her. Apparently not to Canada. But even though apparently in the comments I didn't have time to actually get to her comments, but it's still a little suspect. We're talking Australia here. Okay, she comes from Australia. Who else comes from Australia? Murdoch. You never know if it's a plant to sort of take the thunder away from the truth of a 10-year-old girl raped and impregnated after to cross state lines into Indiana, where it's 22 weeks, not 6, so that she could have an abortion. And apparently the AG, the Attorney General in Indiana, and others, and Fox and Jesse Waters all plastered her picture all over the place, said, hey, we're putting a head on this bitch. Go at it. I hope to God there's enough good people in our Department of Justice to root out the Nazis so we can do something about this. Jeez. I guess we have to call them Antifa before anything gets done. Okay, enough of this rant. I have a curated show. In the royal we, I suppose I should confess, we've taken the time to curate a show to give ourselves a little bit of an anchor from this spite and vitriol that we have to put up with because of all these Nazis. Don't let your state get taken over, because I'm afraid there's enough Nazi sentiment here in Oregon. After all, it was white man's paradise, in the Constitution. Blacks and everybody else not allowed. If you're white, you're all right. That's our history. Want to go back to it, apparently. Oh, do we let them? No. We'll be voting, and we'll be doing a few other activities, too. My God. And when by activities, I mean, there's monetary things that can be done to make their lives miserable. Punch the Nazis. Punch them in the wallet. Okay? That's one way to do it. All right. What's on the curated part of this salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Yes, every House Republican voted to recruit Nazis and white supremacists in the military. Yeah. They voted against a bill to root them out because we need more, is what they say. A suburban Detroit man sued to disqualify Republican Ryan Kelley from the Michigan governor's race, saying he should be declared an insurrectionist whose votes will not count anyway. So why have him in there? And the guy's actually citing the Constitution of the United States. How novel. And Manchin said he'll oppose an economic measure he's been negotiating with Democratic leaders. Remember all that? Oh, I'm negotiating with you. But now he says he's not going to do it if it includes climate or energy provisions or higher taxes on the rich and corporations, because that's what they really want back there in the holler. I don't believe it, but that's what he says. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the International Monetary Fund has reached a preliminary deal with Pakistan on a $6 billion bailout. And a Van Gogh self-portrait has been found hidden behind another painting. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link across the page is the link to our Patreon's page, and the street sweeper is going by, so hopefully he's going up the hill, and indeed he is, and it is a he. Okay, just so you know. That's how he identifies. Anyway, our Patreon page is there because, we have to be honest, we need some help paying our bills, because we're not here to become a media empire that way. Jeez, no one's throwing money at us. Why? Because apparently equal protection and due process for all is not a moneymaker. Okay, we've known that for a long time, but we consider it our civic duty to oppose those dark forces arrayed against representative democracy, not only in the United States, but around the world. And your help has assisted us. I know that's almost redundant, isn't it? But it has. It's assisted us in fulfilling that civic duty, because when you pay your bills, apparently, you can fly under the radar and then continue that resistance. And thankfully, we have been doing that because of your help. And we thank you for that generosity. So if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, for those of you out there who might be considering doing this, if you could buy us, what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink and send those funds to us once a month, we pool those dollars and stretch them beyond compare. And next thing you know, we're resisting as we have been for over the last 11 years. Thank you for your generosity once again. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary. I know they want to call them stories, but they're diaries. About 10 minutes before showtime. Actually, not about. It does, because that's automatic. Thank you, Daily Coz. And then I try to get the show notes and links of the Daily Coz Diary linked up on Twitter and other social media platforms. But sometimes, I'm a little bereft in doing that on time. But you can follow me on Twitter, and then you can get the show notes and links that way. Anyway, because that's where the real reportage is. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. And if they don't burn down the Library of Alexandria at the Internet Archive, which is what the Internet Archive is now, our whole library for the last 11 years of the Netroots Radio library is archived at the Internet Archive at archive.org. Yeah. Some young author publishing houses don't like libraries, and they want to burn down the Internet Archive. All right. They're always at the gates, aren't they? Always. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of The American Independent by Josh Israel. The House of Representatives voted to improve transparency about the ongoing problem of white supremacists and neo-Nazis in the military and law enforcement. Every single Republican present voted no. The party line vote was 218 to 208 in favor of an amendment sponsored by Representative Brad Schneider of Illinois, a Democrat, to, quote, direct the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and the Secretary of Defense to publish a report that analyzes and sets out strategies to combat white supremacist and neo-Nazi activity in the uniformed services and federal law enforcement agencies not later than 180 days after enactment and every 6 months thereafter. The amendment's text requires that these reports include the number of individuals discharged from the uniformed services due to incidents related to white supremacy and neo-Nazi activity, the number of federal law enforcement officers separated from federal agencies due to incidents related to white supremacy or neo-Nazi activity, a description of what happened in each incident, information about how the incidents were handled, and plans to address the problem. In a floor speech explaining his proposal, Schneider cited a May report by the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency titled Insider Threat and Extremist Activity Within the Department of Defense. He said the agency laid out in a very clear presentation defining what is domestic violent extremism, laying out the stages of development, highlighted 7 cases of extremism in active duty and former duty service members, and went on to describe for commanders steps they can take in prevention and reporting. Noting that the amendment would help agencies track and address the problem, Schneider explained these are exceptions. They are rare, but we must do everything we can to identify them and thwart them before risks become reality. But Representative Andy Biggs, a repug from Arizona, denounced the amendment as Orwellian and said it attempts to create a problem where none exists. He also predicted that potential military recruits would be so offended by even the existence of a report they would not join up, because apparently the youngsters haven't been taught to punch a Nazi. White of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. A suburban Detroit man sued to try to disqualify Republican Ryan Kelley from the Michigan governor's race, saying he should be declared an insurrectionist whose votes won't count. Kelley faces misdemeanor charges for his role in the riot at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. See what I mean? Only misdemeanor charges for storming the Capitol to try to overthrow the government. Was he an innocent bystander just caught up in the moment? I don't think so. Well, the lawsuit says the Western Michigan man's participation makes him ineligible for office under the U.S. Constitution. The 14th Amendment states that anyone who is engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the U.S. and has taken an oath to support the Constitution cannot hold a state office. Kelley took an oath in 2019 when he was a planning commissioner in Allendale Township, according to a lawsuit filed on behalf of Lee Estes. Whether it's Ryan Kelley or anyone else that was illegally at the Capitol trying to overturn the will of the people, there needs to be accountability, said Lonnie Scott of Progress Michigan, a Democratic group supporting the lawsuit. The Republican Party of Michigan noted that the lawsuit was filed by attorney Mark Brewer, former head of the state Democratic Party. Well, so effing what? Anyway, Kelley is among 5 candidates in the Republican primary on August 2nd. The winner will face Governor Gretchen Whitmer in the fall. A supporter of Trump, he has acknowledged that he was at the Capitol during the riot, but said he did not go inside. He has pleaded not guilty to disruptive conduct, injuring public property, and entering restricted space without permission. And polls showed he appeared to get a boost after his June arrest. Brings us this final offering in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Senator Joe Manchin said he will oppose an economic measure he's been negotiating with Democratic leaders if it includes climate or energy provisions or higher taxes on the rich and corporations. And this delivers a stunning blow to one of the party's top election year priorities. Right before the midterms, Joe. Thank you. The official who disclosed this said Manchin told Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on Thursday yesterday that he will only support a new measure if it is limited to curbing pharmaceutical prices and extending federal subsidies for buying health care coverage. Manchin abruptly derailed his party's bigger and wider-ranging social and environmental pact last December after months of negotiations and after the measure had already passed the House. Manchin's demands leave the future of the latest measure unclear, seemingly upending the hopes of President Joe Biden and Democratic leaders for a more sweeping package they could push through Congress by August. That would have let them show Democratic voters that they were addressing a range of party priorities like curbing climate change, taxing the rich, and drawing a contrast with Republicans who are expected to oppose the legislation unanimously, with help from Joe Manchin. Well, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, when truth is scarier than fiction, sometimes the baddest, most memorable villains come from real life. James Whitey Bulger is a perfect example. Bulger became one of the most notorious and powerful underworld figures in the Northeast thanks to his alliance with the local FBI branch. Black Mass, which is based on the book by the same name, looks at that alliance between Bulger and the corrupt FBI agent John Conley, played by Joel Edgerton in a decidedly unglamorous role. Unlike many mob movies, Black Mass doesn't waste time on backstories that aren't relevant. This is smart on the part of director Scott Cooper because there is enough material here for several movies. However, by focusing squarely on Bulger and his rise and eventual fall, the movie has a fast-paced feeling to it that belies the fact it is 122 minutes. While Cooper and the film editor deserve credit for this, Johnny Depp also deserves recognition for his mesmerizing performance as Bulger. While Depp is arguably one of the best actors of his generation, many of his recent over-the-top performances have left audiences cold. This one does not. Bulger's creepiness comes from his subtlety. Depp, who was well known for getting into character, collaborated with longtime makeup artist Joel Harlow to physically become Bulger, right down to his ice blue eyes, which are as cold and unflinching as a Boston winter night. He rarely raises his voice and instead prefers to let his actions speak for him. He's a psychopath in the truest sense of the word and commits some of the most chilling on-screen murders in recent cinematic history, even though very little actual violence is shown. While Black Mass may not be the best crime movie of all time, it is nonetheless very good and reminds us that award season is here. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on the Take Two Movie Review page on YouTube.
And welcome to COVID Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
This is your fast-track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research and help you understand what it really means.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
And we're Scientific American's senior health editors. Today, we'll look at how new Omicron subvariants are already increasing cases and hospitalizations.
And we'll try and figure out if fall vaccine boosters should contain standard Omicron or some of those new subvariants instead. It's the height of summer here, and we were kind of hoping for a break, but we're already seeing another COVID surge. This time, it's driven by Omicron subvariants BA5 and BA4. What do we know about them so far?
Yeah, Josh, well, unfortunately, the lull after the last surge didn't last very long. BA4 and BA5 are offshoots of the Omicron variant, a version of which caused a massive wave earlier this year. BA5, and to a lesser extent BA4, now make up more than 70% of COVID infections in the US. and they are the most capable of evading our immune response from vaccination or infection of any variant so far.
Now you have me worried. Do we know if these subvariants are causing more severe disease?
Well, we do know that we're seeing upticks in hospitalizations in countries around the world, including here in the US. The variants appeared to cause more severe disease in hamsters, but there's not yet clear evidence of this in people. But the more people who get infected, the more people who will end up in the hospital. It's just numbers.
Right. Even if the portion of severe disease stays the same, the absolute number will climb along with these infections. Now, the subvariants are already dominant in some countries. Can we learn anything from those places about what might happen here?
Well, it's hard to make direct comparisons because each country has its own patchwork of immunity to the virus. But we can see a clear pattern elsewhere. BA4 and BA5 were first seen in South Africa, and then in Portugal, where they caused a spike in hospitalizations, despite the country's high vaccination rate. This is now happening in many other countries.
And previous infections don't appear to protect against these variants as well, do they?
That's right. People who had the original Omicron variant, BA1, seem to have a higher rate of reinfection with these newer Omicron subvariants compared to those infected with previous variants. That's troubling because it seems like hybrid immunity from vaccination plus infection no longer seems to last that long.
So are we just going to keep getting COVID over and over and over again?
Well, possibly, unless vaccine makers can develop new booster shots that target Omicron subvariants. That could improve our protection. It seems likely the US could face another fall or winter COVID wave. But we could have better booster shots to ward it off. Josh, what are the chances of that?
It does look like better boosters are coming, Tanya. The question is whether they'll get here in time to stop that fall wave that you mentioned. And the timing seems to depend on what vaccine makers put in the shots.
So what are the choices?
Well, both Moderna and Pfizer began developing shots with the ancestral Omicron variant months ago, and Moderna has already said those could be ready by August. But the FDA and its Vaccine Advisory Committee just said that the new boosters should be built around the new subvariants, BA4 and BA5. And the vaccine makers say that those shots, which they're just starting to test, wouldn't be ready until October.
But that will be too late to fend off a fall wave. Why pick the slower route?
Because it looks like boosters using BA4 and 5 will protect people better, since those subvariants are the ones dominating new infections right now. So they'll either be the ones circulating in the fall, or those fall viruses will be very similar. The FDA wanted boosters that are more likely to produce antibodies that neutralize the subvariants. And lab tests indicate that vaccines built around ancestral Omicron don't do that well enough. The subvariants are just different enough from their ancestor to evade an Omicron-prompted immune response. The idea behind the boosters is to trigger broader-based immunity. So the shots contain genetic material from the original SARS-CoV-2 virus, the one that hit us in early 2020, as a foundation. And then they add in material from the new subvariants. It's basically teaching your immune system to respond to a wider spectrum of virus versions.
So this is kind of a race against time, and virologists are hoping the boosters are so effective they can stop or slow down a new wave.
Yes, it's a race. I think the FDA was convinced by data showing that people infected by ancestral Omicron were getting reinfected by the subvariants. So they were afraid that the same kind of thing would happen if they rolled out old Omicron-based boosters. Health officials were also worried that people wouldn't get such boosters. That's already a problem. 3/4 of people eligible for boosters have not gotten them, and there seems to be a perception that the shots, based on the 2020 virus, are outdated. Peter Marks, who runs the FDA's vaccine office, says he hopes effective boosters against the latest subvariants will convince a lot more people that the shots are up to date, and they should roll up their sleeves.
What happens, though, if the fall virus is some new, really different version? New versions seem to keep turning up every couple of months.
It is a bit of a gamble, but Trevor Bedford, an evolutionary biologist at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center, thinks it's a good bet the fall virus will be pretty similar. He tracks the way the virus mutates and says all the recent changes keep new versions within the Omicron branch of the virus family tree. Since those versions have been wildly successful at spreading, he expects that trend to continue. And this summer, vaccine makers and the FDA will be testing those new boosters to make sure they are just as successful at keeping up.
Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us. Our show is edited by Jeff Del Vicio and Tulika Bose.
We're going to take a short summer break for the next 2 weeks.
Even in a pandemic, you need some time off.
Especially in a pandemic.
But we'll be back the first week of August with a new episode of COVID Quickly.
And check out Siam.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it happened. There was a sudden jolt and our submarine crashed on the seafloor. We were in total darkness.
That's Dr. Dejana Figueroa, a marine biologist and STEM teacher, talking about a deep sea dive she'll never forget.
It's funny, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the ocean. And there I was, 2 miles below the surface. But as a scientist, you prepare for that. Using our training and a little creativity, we fixed the sub and finished our experiments. The dive was just too important. Every dive gives us glimpses at things few people ever get to see. Glowing creatures, fiery undersea volcanoes. When we got back to the surface, I kissed the ground and called my mom, of course. But you know what? I wouldn't trade that dive for anything.
Dr. Figueroa uses her passion for STEM to discover new things and make the world a better place. She can STEM, so can you. Check out She Can STEM for more stories and inspiration. A message from the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Welcome to 60 Seconds Civics from the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. Every day we make numerous choices in deciding what course of action will add to our well-being, what will make us happy. Making these choices is the pursuit of happiness. The results of our choices are not all equal. We soon discover that choosing some pleasures, especially following momentary impulses, leads not to happiness, but to pain. But if we use our faculty of foresight, recalling past experience, we learn to postpone immediate gratification and see what choices are really in our interest. Thus, learning self-control based on experience is essential to happiness. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Seconds Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, and we are going all the way back to the year 1381. That was the day John Ball, the leader of the Peasants' Revolt in England, was executed. Due to the plague, the Black Death, in 1348, many peasants had died. Land was plentiful, and laborers were scarce. The authorities responded with emergency legislation, the Ordinance of Laborers in 1349, and the Statute of Laborers in 1351. These laws fixed wages at pre-plague levels and punished employers trying to outbid their competitors. Local lords had the right to prevent serfs from leaving their manors. To raise money for the ongoing 100 Years' War with France, Parliament levied a new tax on every person over the age of 14. This was especially unpopular among the peasant class. The church sided with the wealthy landowners. As a result, some priests rebelled against the church's hierarchy. John Ball was one of these rebels, and for his rebellion, he was imprisoned at Maidstone Castle. The initial outbreak of the Peasants' Revolt occurred in 1380. The people rose up against the new tax. One tax collector was beaten and driven from the village of Fabit. The Chief Justice, sent to calm the peasants, suffered a similar fate. Word spread, and uprisings occurred throughout England. Rebels in Kent besieged Maidstone Castle and freed John Ball. Troops were dispatched around the country to suppress the revolt. John Ball was hung, drawn and quartered in the marketplace, as an example to any other potential rebels. The peasants' revolt was crushed, but Parliament gave up trying to control peasant wages and stopped collecting the poll tax. Many peasants were now considered free men, no longer owned by landowners. All of these things helped to end the feudal system. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 63 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs of only about 90 to 92, considerably cooler than what we had yesterday, since we were over 100, about 101 throughout quite a bit of the day. Should be sunny throughout this day, though there are some wispy high clouds blowing through at the moment. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Clear skies overnight with lows in the upper 50s, which is about what it was last night. Quite pleasant. Winds will continue out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Sunny skies tomorrow with highs about 90 to 92. Winds out of the west, northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. We have not had an update for our coronavirus infections or deceased, so we'll give that to you next week when we finally do get an update. Grass pollen is rated high outside the window here in Rogue River, and I can attest to that. The air quality index, though, for the region is good at 29 parts per million, and the daytime UV index remains very high at level 9. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.08 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is dropping. It is now at 70%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 77 degrees and partly cloudy, and they have a heat advisory, the first red flag that they have issued in the history of the island. Just letting you know. Paris is 81 and sunny. Rome is 93 and fair with their heat advisory that could impact critical electrical infrastructure. Kyiv is 70 degrees and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 73 and clear. Hong Kong is 85 and fair. Tokyo is 75 degrees and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 47 and fair. San Francisco, California is 55 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York is 81 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Munir Ahmed of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The International Monetary Fund said it has reached a preliminary agreement with Pakistan to revive a $6 billion bailout package for this impoverished majority Muslim nation struck by a serious economic crisis since last year. Pakistan and the IMF originally signed the accord in 2019, but the release of a slightly over $1 billion tranche had been on hold since earlier this year. That's when the IMF expressed concern about Pakistan's compliance with the conditions of the bailout under former Prime Minister Imran Khan. The parliament ousted Khan in a no-confidence vote in April. Under newly elected Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, the government has been in talks with the IMF since May to avoid a default like Sri Lanka's. The agreement with the fund has set the stage to bring the country out of economic difficulties, Sharif wrote on Twitter. In recent weeks, Pakistan's government imposed additional taxes and slashed subsidies on fuel, electricity, and natural gas to meet IMF conditions. That made the government highly unpopular, but Sharif says the actions were necessary. In a statement yesterday, Thursday, the fund said it has reached a staff-level agreement with the Pakistan authorities. It added the deal is subject to the approval by the IMF's executive board. It added, though, that Pakistan will be eligible to receive a critical installment of about $1.17 billion.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Associated Press staff brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A previously unknown self-portrait of Vincent van Gogh has been discovered behind another of the artist's paintings, the National Galleries of Scotland said yesterday, Thursday. The self-portrait was found on the back of Van Gogh's head of a peasant woman when experts at the Edinburgh Gallery took an X-ray of the canvas ahead of an upcoming exhibition. The work is believed to have been hidden for over a century, covered by layers of glue and cardboard, when it was framed in the early 20th century. Van Gogh was known for turning canvases around and painting on the other side to save money. The portrait shows a bearded sitter in a brimmed hat. Experts said the subject was instantly recognizable as the artist himself and is thought to be from his early work. The left ear is clearly visible, and Van Gogh famously cut off his ear in 1888. Francis Fowle, a senior curator of the National Galleries of Scotland, said the discovery was thrilling. Moments like this are incredibly rare, she said. We have discovered an unknown work by Vincent van Gogh, one of the most important and popular artists in the world. The gallery said the experts are evaluating how to remove the glue and cardboard without harming head of a peasant woman. Visitors to an upcoming Impressionist exhibit at the Royal Scottish Academy in Edinburgh can see an X-ray image of the self-portrait through a light box. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day, all night, and all weekend for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here on Monday, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. De novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.